The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.
Intelligent generation we're really a software company. We're a services company that provides our software as a service to operate and dispatch the batteries. We're not the developer, we're not the EPC. We work with them as partners to help develop projects, and then ultimately we operate them for the long term. Our contracts are typically 10 to 15, even 20 years for the life of that asset and that battery where we're going to control and dispatch things.
Are you speeding the energy transition? Here at the Clean Power Hour, our hosts Tim Montague and John Weaver bring you the best in solar, batteries, and clean technologies every week. Want to go deeper into decarbonization? We do too. We're here to help you understand and command the commercial, residential, and utility solar, wind, and storage industries. So let's get to it. Together we can speed the energy transition.
Today on the Clean Power Hour, Behind the Meter Solar and Storage. My guest today is David Braun. He is the Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Intelligent Generation, a trusted partner of ours here in the Midwest. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Tim. Glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's great to have IG on the show again. I've had Mark Thrum a couple of times, and everybody's interested in batteries. Every solar professional has to be a storage professional now. And so many companies, EPCs, installers, developers are drinking truly from a fire hose. The value stack of storage is so varied. It is wonderful, but it is highly variable from geography to geography, from ISO to ISO, from utility to utility. And so what's happening is the United States is kind of getting carved up into local fiefdoms. And you have captured PJM and MISO. Congratulations. You might be wondering, how do C&I solar PPAs get financed? For many, it remains a mystery. For others, there's Conductor. Conductor Solar helps hundreds of developers and EPCs find investors, close transactions, and collaborate effectively. With competitive bids from high-quality partners, Conductor makes sure you and your customers get the best PPA deal every time. Free to use for developers and EPCs? Visit conductor.solar today. Tell us a little bit about your background. You have a storied history in the energy industry, and how did you come to Intelligent Generation?
Yeah, I've been in the industry since the beginnings of my career. I started out of Northwestern, where I got a mechanical engineering degree, and then joined ComEd to start my career. And that was a great place to start, really. I mean, ComEd and the utilities in general often maligned, but I'm glad I started there. It gave me a good understanding of the industry from the ground up, from the meter, from the transformer, all the way back to the generator. And I worked with large industrial accounts there, and even during pre-deregulation days, when ComEd was introducing some of the original demand response programs and had permissions to do things like a limited number of special rate contracts, I was right at the forefront of that. And so also had the privilege of having them pay for my MBA. So I'm always thankful for that as well. Something that I don't think happens a lot in corporate America anymore. But from there moved into working with what became Exelon Energy as markets were deregulating. Exelon saw, or at the time was Unicom, ComEd's parent then, saw the threat as well as opportunities to their businesses, and worked on some strategic planning, and then that led into joining what originally was a gas marketer that grew into power marketing called Exelon Energy, and was able to write some of the original contracts that Exelon had back in the day. Moved on from there to a couple of different companies across the deregulated market spectrum, still typically working with large industrials, but worked for Direct Energy. I ran the PJM and MISO markets for NG Resources for about 7 years. Did some stints in consulting, both with large industrials on the buy side, as well as doing some renewable VPPA, PPPA on-site purchasing for some industrials as well. And then I had an opportunity to join a company called Glide Path Power, which is a renewable asset owner and storage developer at the utility scale. So we had 450 megawatts of wind and solar, old assets that we bought from the likes of Exelon and NextEra, really with the idea of hanging utility scale batteries at those interconnections. And I ran the P&L and asset management and operations for those assets for several years. So it was a great introduction and deepening of my understanding of renewable assets as well as storage, because we had a 20 megawatt battery in front of the meter in utility scale in Pennsylvania, developed another one in Texas at the time. So that was an interesting introduction into that side of the industry. So when this opportunity came about, it was interesting. I was contacted by a headhunter, a placement service, and they were looking for this role. And I hadn't heard of intelligent generation. I didn't know Jay Marhofer, didn't know Mark Throom. Was skeptical of the company. She couldn't really describe it because what we do is not something that everyone is familiar with. And but as I got to know them, as I got to dig into what they do, I really understood that this was not some fly-by-night operation, but really a very solid company that really matched up my skill sets. They were looking for somebody that had utility experience, retail energy experience, large C&I experience, and renewables and battery experience. I was thinking there's really very few people with those kinds of varied backgrounds to be able to fill this role. So I thought it was perfect for me, and it has been. I've really enjoyed it. It's a very professional group. They've been at it for a long time. Intelligent Generation was started by Jay and a few other founders back in 2009. Jay Marhofer was a IT and utility consultant and attorney, and actually wrote a book in 2007 about the value stack that batteries can provide. And was one of the first people talking about that, and went on to form a company around that in 2009. And they initially started out in the incubator, technology incubator, Illinois Institute of Technology, bench testing the systems, writing the initial code, and getting started. And it's really grown from there. So it's a great group to work with. And I joined really to move us into a very professional marketing and sales initiative, and really ramp up our prospecting and our sales, which is what's happening right now.
Yeah, I mean, I got to know Intelligent Generation while I was working at Continental Energy Solutions. Continental is a large solar and storage EPC in the Chicago area. And, you mentioned the value stack, and my listeners are familiar with this, but the value stack is unique to different geographies. So why don't we explain what we're talking about and some of the variability in that stack from place to place. Solar is a wonderful thing, okay? It's electricity from sunshine, which is truly amazing. A battery, on the other hand, can produce power, it can absorb power, it can give you power on demand 24/7, and so it's much more flexible. It comes at a price, and luckily we are at a point in the technology adoption curve where storage is now relatively affordable. Incentives do help. We have a generous incentive in Illinois, $250 per kWh, which I think is quite similar to an incentive that's going on in California right now. But the core customer at Continental was large C&I projects. These are manufacturers, warehouses, retailers, big box stores, schools, colleges. And when you pair the battery with the solar array, you are able to generate a bottom line, much more ROI. It's a faster payback period, and it's much more generous, simple payback. Like, you're going to get more dollars out of the project. So explain for us, though, what we mean by the value stack, and what is the unique value stack that Intelligent Generation is unlocking here in the Midwest.
Yeah, that's a great introduction to that whole topic and concept, because it's really the heart of what we do. But let me stop and step back 1 second before delving into the stack and talk about the grid needs, because this is really the beginning of what the stack is. So the grid really needs to provide two things to customers. One is energy, And that's really the fuel that drives all of our motors, lights, computers, everything else. But it also needs power. And that's the instantaneous capability of providing voltage effectively. And it has to provide both. It can't provide one if it doesn't provide the other. So when you start thinking about generation, which is the basis of all of this, our old fossil plants and nuclear plants and even hydro can provide both very easily, right? They can provide the power, that's the megawatts that they can generate instantaneously, and then the fuel that goes into them provides the kilowatt hours over time. Solar and wind are intermittent resources, right? We don't know at any instant of time how much power we're going to get out of them. So they're very good at producing energy. They're great at producing energy. Whenever there are phenomenon's going on, though, right? You need to have wind blowing at high enough velocities to generate power in the wind farms. And you need the sun to be shining and fully shining to get the full capability out of the solar panels. So from a grid dispatch perspective, they can't rely on knowing that if you need power at this moment, they can call on that asset and call on that resource and know that they can get 100 megawatts or whatever they need. So the grid needs both. And that's where batteries can come in. Batteries can provide that power, right? They're not creating kilowatt hours, they're not creating energy, they're storing it, and then they're able to deliver that through their inverter. And that is an asset, that's a resource that the grid dispatcher can rely on in that instant of time, knowing that if he pushes that button, he's going to get X number of megawatts delivered at that moment. So when we talk about the value stack, that's where we begin to look at what are the things a battery can do. And a battery can do lots of things, but it doesn't do anything unless someone tells it what to do. In intelligent generation, we're the ones who tell it what to do. So from the value stack perspective, we're analyzing on a continuous basis in our data center, on our algorithms, what is the best use of that battery in that moment of time, and then telling our battery fleet, which is really like a virtual power plant, it is a virtual power plant, what to do at that moment. And the value stack can be delivering energy. And so the considerations there are things like energy arbitrage. Can you store cheap power and deliver it back to the grid when power is expensive or extra power is needed? Or can you store solar energy that's not needed because you've got too much? This is what happens in California, right? We're all familiar with the famous duck curve out there where they generate too much solar during the afternoon, and as the sun sets, they have this huge need and for generation, and the solar can't provide it. So store that energy when there's too much solar, and then deliver it back in those evening hours, and arbitrage that. So that's one element, that energy element. We can provide demand, we can provide capacity to the grid. And so from a billing standpoint, the way you look at the bill structures, every customer, every utility, industrial customer, commercial customer is paying for two things. They're paying for energy, and they're also paying for demand. And that demand is how fast you're using the energy. What's that peak load? And so there are several different ways that's measured, or that's used. One is just for paying for the distribution system. That's usually a monthly demand charge. There's also capacity, which is generation capacity, and PJM and MISO. That's charged by the ISO to the load serving entity. So your utility or your retail energy supplier is charged for that generation capacity based on various calculations, but set based on auction prices. So these are market-based prices that change over time, usually set for a year. And transmission's another one. So what is being paid for is having the system capability in place to provide that instantaneous load capability to serve that load. So that's capacity, that's transmission, that's demand. And then there's a lot of other things that still need to take place to keep the lights on. These are what are known as ancillary services. These are reserve margins. These are regulation of frequency, regulation of voltage. And that's another area that batteries can provide that, because they can provide instantaneous either storage or dispatch or delivery of energy and power at instantaneous notice. And traditionally that's been done by fossil units, because we can spin them a little faster, a little slower to keep the grid in balance. But as we have fewer of that type of asset and more inverter based like solar and wind, we don't have those assets that can do that. And so that's where the batteries step in and provide those ancillary services. And as we know, batteries can also provide resilience, right? If the grid goes black, you have a battery sitting there that can be relied upon to provide power to your facility, to keep the lights on at least for a short time. And most outages are short enough that are, a 4-hour battery can cover that. And beyond that, you still need a backup generator. So those are all the elements of the value stack. And like you said, Tim, the value of those depends greatly on the tariffs. And those tariffs are set at the FERC level for things like capacity and transmission, and at the state level, utility level, for things like demand and energy. And what we can do to manipulate those and save customers money depends on where you are. And that's really that's the company's motto, right? One of the things we talk about is earn, save, protect. We help customers earn money by delivering ancillary services to the grid and being paid for it, save money, helping customers save money on the bill by reducing these cost elements, and then protect your facility and keep the lights on.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more. So we should probably get into a case study, honestly, because this stack is fairly abstract for the average listener. Now, if you're a battery storage developer, you understand this completely, and this is your daily drive, so to speak. But you have a myriad of wonderful cases on your website. Go to intelgen.com, and you'll see G&W Electric, Apt, Magid Glove, Continental, Libman, S&C Electric, just to name a few of these mostly industrial facilities, but not all. Continental is the office where Continental Electrical and Continental Energy Solutions call home. But what is it at the outset, I guess, that you're looking at? How do you explain the value to a customer? And then if you want, let's pick one of those. You have many to choose from, but I think that will help our listener really understand, because it truly is a game changer. And this is hard, I think, for C&I EPCs and developers who have really focused on solar historically to kind of get their arms around this value stack and how it plays out in the real world.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing because most customers don't have the expertise in looking at their power bill. They think it's a kilowatt hour, and a kilowatt hour is a kilowatt hour, and that's all they're buying. But when you really break it down, there's all these different services that stand behind that, and that's where really the value stack lies. So we start by talking about, again, earn, save, protect. We help you save money on your bill, earn money by providing services to the grid from the battery and by dispatching that battery, and then we can protect your asset, and that has values as well by keeping the lights on and keeping, if it's a manufacturing plant, preventing lost time, lost materials, and waste. And then I do usually go through that value stack, and then begin to drill in on how those values are provided. Things like capacity and transmission. The price that you pay for there, the cost you pay for that as an industrial customer, is set on just 5 hours per year, what they call the 5 coincident peaks, which is when the grid sets its peak for the year. And the way we attack that savings is by predicting when those are going to happen. You don't know when they're going to happen until after the fact. So we predict when those are going to happen, and on those days, we'll store up the energy all night, build it up, have the battery full, and then in those hours where we expect one of those peak hours could occur, we discharge the batteries so that what is showing up on your utility meter is lower by the amount of the battery. So we can substantially reduce what the capacity and transmission charges are based on that. And we have to do that about 20 times a year to make sure we hit those 5. And they can the 5 cap can be different than the 5 transmission hours. So
but aren't you getting a signal from the utility when they anticipate a capacity day?
They do not give a signal on that. No, it's up. They do a load forecast. The ISO gives us a load forecast every day, but that's not necessarily accurate. So we're taking that into account, but we're also doing our own prediction, and we're buying services from others and using things like artificial intelligence now to be able to predict when those are going to happen. But you don't know when those peaks are going to happen until either the end of the summer or in some cases the end of the year. And then what you did use during those events, that sets the baseline for what you have to pay for capacity and transmission the next year. So even if you're a customer who's buying a fixed rate per kilowatt hour and they don't break all this stuff out, it's all still behind the scenes. Your supplier has to build all of that in. And that's why sometimes you see some pass-throughs of those on your bills on adjustments for things like transmission. We recommend to our customers that they take all those services as pass-throughs and just pay what they actually owe based on the ISO calculations, because then by using the batteries, we can reduce what those costs are. So in some cases, we can take that to zero, and that's 25 to 30% of an industrial customer's bill is in those capacity and transmission charges. So
yeah. Let's stop there. Let's stop there, David.
Yeah.
Okay, so listeners, what David is talking about, these capacity charges. Okay, in California, you attack demand charges because demand charges are quite high. That is not the case in the Midwest. You can attack demand charges, but they're not going to make a huge difference. These capacity charges that David is referencing are going to make a huge difference. And I'll just call out what I see in my experience working with Continental and IG as the stack. And let's just pick Libman as a good example. Okay, we just talked about capacity charges, okay, up to 30% of a customer's bill. With a battery, you're attacking those charges by preloading some aspect of the facility and then discharging the battery as fast as you can to reduce the load on the facility during that window when the grid is humming. Ride through, okay? Libman is an injection molder. A uncontrolled outage is very expensive for a company like that, where they've got plastic machinery that gets gummed up if it goes down in an uncontrolled manner. So the battery allows you to ride through. It's a form of resiliency. And resiliency is huge, but very hard to value, generally speaking, depending on the setting. So every company will have a unique value for resiliency. And then these ancillary services, frequency regulation and voltage regulation, many people say, well, that's not bankable, so we're going to ignore that. Well, you guys have a track record of delivering this service, for your customers over now a long period of time. And so you can compare the before and after, before what you modeled and after what reality showed. And you've demonstrated that within I think a 90% plus confidence interval that you're hitting the mark and you're delivering value. So the utility is paying you for the services that the battery is providing to the grid, which it needs. Batteries are a wonderful thing for the grid operator. The more solar we install, the more batteries that a grid operator ultimately is going to want on the grid. Did I get that right?
You got that absolutely right. I'm impressed how well you know our case studies and talking about things like Libman and what they're doing down there. But yeah, we hadn't really talked in depth much about the regulation services that the battery can provide, and what you're referring to there was frequency regulation, where when that's the best operation for the battery, and that's probably about 90% of the time where the most value is. We're actually taking a signal every 2 seconds from the grid operator that tells the battery to charge or discharge. We process that signal based on where our battery states of charge are and where we want them to be, and then tell the battery to charge or discharge. And that is a market price. The PJM is a market. So as they're buying these services from generators and batteries and others to provide and keep the grid flowing, they have to pay a market price for that. So that's where you refer to, is it bankable or is it not? We have a history, though, in these markets that go back more than 10 years. And so we know where these prices have been in the past. And we also can look at correlations. Ancillary services frequency regulation is correlated 90% to the price of energy, to the real-time price of energy, which is correlated to the price of gas. So as you see those markets go up and down, we'll also see the other services go up and down in price. Case in point, in 2022, frequency regulation paid almost $400,000 a megawatt. Last year, it paid closer to probably $125,000, $150,000 a megawatt. So because 22 we saw really high energy prices, 23 they came down a lot. These services also really are paid a lot during grid distress events. So if you think about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, when everything was so cold, we were sub-zero in Chicago and across the Midwest. Some of those hours paid a lot for these regulation services because they're needed to keep the grid in balance. The grid becomes relatively unstable in those events, and batteries can help keep the lights on and make sure that we don't have power outages, and then get paid very handsomely for it. When things are going well, the prices are low, but when we have a little more distress or higher energy prices, they do get higher. But so we do look at things like history and correlations. And when someone tells me, "Oh, I don't think frequency is going to be worth anything in the future," it's like, okay, why is the correlation going to break? It's been there for 15 years, and suddenly you're thinking it's breaking. So it's something that we look at, but that's also why we like working behind the meter, because we have all these other value stack opportunities to provide value to the customer. And so none of them are critical to the asset economic performance like they would be with some in front of the meter batteries that may only be doing frequency regulation.
Right.
They're down to just one risk element, and that increases the risk. Getting back to a couple of the case studies too, like you mentioned before, a big one we like to point to from resiliency is G&W Electric. That's another injection molding operation. They actually were able to put a number on their losses, and they built a microgrid there at their plant in Bolingbrook, where they manufacture electrical switchgear that goes onto the smart grid that the utilities are building right now. Their operations were seeing, on average, about 13 utility grid events a year that were interrupting their injection molding processes. And when that happens, they're down for as much as a shift while the maintenance technicians come in and clean out the waste product that got stuck in there when the lights went out. And sometimes it is such a short duration outage that you don't even notice it with the eye. These are sub-second outages sometimes that are tripping off their molding machines. So ultimately, they had an event. The owner there, John Mueller, said, "I've had enough. Let's fix this. We're a smart grid company. Let's apply our own smart grid engineering and make this happen." So they built a microgrid with 2 megawatts of solar on their roof, a 2 megawatt flow battery, vanadium redox flow battery, a flywheel, 1300 kVA flywheel that helps keep the lights on sub-cycle. That's how fast it can respond, but only lasts under a minute. And then all that backed up by diesel generation, which they never have to use anymore because they've got so many other things ahead of it. So they can actually, if push comes to shove and the lights are out for a long time, they could continue to operate their plant and isolate it and island it and keep the lights on. So they were able to put a number on that. Every time they had an outage, even a brief one, it was costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars. So they've already avoided, in the past 18 months that system's been up, they've already avoided close to 20 events that would have taken them out and cost them millions of dollars in losses. So that value then can be built into the economics of the project, and it makes for a very quick payback.
I'm just curious, when you're designing and then ultimately constructing a microgrid, is it that much more difficult if you have multiple sources of generation per se, like the flywheel and the generator and the battery, versus just, say, solar and storage?
It is more difficult. I think it's a question of how, is there value in bringing those other elements into the project and into the microgrid? We have some out there that are not microgridded at all. They're a battery. The battery is really operating independently of solar and can be used if necessary to support the operations at that facility, but it doesn't have to, and it doesn't do that automatically. But you look at other cases like Blibman and G&W and Apt, where they did want that element of backup power, and adding the additional elements into that is, it's difficult, but it comes down to problem solving and coding and making sure that the right operations are in place and controlled so that when something does happen, the right things happen. It's a bunch of if-thens. And if the lights go out, do this and then do this and then do this. If that's not all arranged correctly, things don't happen the right way. But it also takes engineering in the front end to understand what automatic switches need to be in place, and some of those can get very expensive. If you need really rapid transfer of power, you need something like a static switch or even a flywheel, and then that just starts to increase the cost of the project. So if you do have a big resiliency need, it makes sense. As App says, their revenues are millions of dollars a day through the storefront and through their website, which they host there at their store. And if the lights go out, it's the cash register is not ringing to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars per hour, or even for shorter times than that. So keeping the lights on is very important to them. They've had some problem solving issues, some growth issues on these things. The first time the lights went out, the generators kicked on and the battery still was looking to be charged at the same time. And so the engines ended up failing because they couldn't generate enough power to supply the store and the battery at the same time. So now it's okay, if the grid isn't there, we have to, and the generators start. Once the battery can control and keep the lights on until the generators get on, and then once they're on, they run off of those and not the battery. So it's those kinds of just coding things to make sure that the microgrid is doing the right things. But it takes infrastructure and just takes some know-how, and that's where our partners come in with that know-how.
Yeah, I would imagine that there's a certain amount of sophistication needed in this software and hardware, and maybe applications of machine learning and such. I don't want to get too deep in those weeds, though. I want to keep this fairly high level. I mean, ultimately, what I want my listeners to consider, if you're working in PJM or MISO, is reach out to me and I'll connect you to David, or go to Intelligent Generation. They have a contact form there, intelgen.com. So, David, in our last couple of minutes together, and I also wanted to note that you will be at the upcoming Midwest Solar Expo, May 20th to 22nd. The URL is Midwest Solar Expo. I'm very involved in that event, so I'll be there as well. So you could meet David and company face-to-face at the Midwest Solar Expo, which is going to be right near O'Hare. David, what do EPCs and developers need to know about behind-the-meter solar and storage that they may not know today, especially working in the Midwest, but could be in other markets as well?
I think what they need to know is, the battery is a great way to enhance the returns on the project, especially in markets like Illinois, where on top of the ITC and the IRA that we're all familiar with, Illinois brings in some great rebates through CEJA, the Clean and Equitable Jobs Act from 2021. That it's probably going to get some more amendments to coming soon, hopefully this year. When you look at solar alone in Illinois, we probably see 4 or 5 year payback on a solar project alone. In Ohio, that might be 5 or 6 years. When you bring a battery onto that, we're knocking 6 months to a year off of that payback period. So we're increasing the returns because of these other capabilities and other savings and revenues that the battery can bring to the projects. And then if you have a customer that wants to talk about microgrids, they want to talk about resiliency, is a gentleman at G&W likes to say, Intelligent Generation is the cash register that helps them pay for that microgrid, because we bring in these other services by controlling when that battery is dispatching, and earn money and save money for them.
Yeah, just to be clear, you're a software as a service company. You create the initial financial model for how a microgrid is going to ROI for a customer, but you're not the integrator, you're not the EPC. And a good EPC like Continental, shout out to Brian Haug, who was on the show just a couple of weeks ago. Go to cleanpowerhour.com, check out all of our interviews. We're dropping 2 interviews a week now. and click on the YouTube icon. We have a very robust YouTube channel. Please subscribe, like, and reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love hearing from my listeners and connecting with you and hearing your ideas. But when it comes to getting these projects done, David, do you have some words of wisdom for our audience?
Sure. Yeah. And let me just, I like the clarification that you gave a minute ago. I want to kind of drill into that a little more for a second. But yeah, intelligent generation we're really a software company. We're a services company that provides our software as a service to operate and dispatch the batteries. We're not the developer. We're not the EPC. We work with them as partners to help develop the projects, and then ultimately we operate them for the long term. Our contracts are typically 10 to 15, even 20 years. For the life of that asset and that battery, where we're going to control and dispatch things. But we're also, I want to point out, we're also a member of the ISOs. We are a market participant and member of PJM and MISO, just like the utilities and the generators are. And that's where we get to do things like bidding these assets into the market and into the grid and earning those wholesale revenues, like we've talked about earlier in this discussion. So in terms of recommendations, and working with batteries, my recommendation is bring us in early, and we're pretty easy to work with. Give me a utility bill, 1 month utility bill and 1 month bill from the retail supplier, and we can get energy data. We need the hourly energy data, and we can often get that from the utility directly. And we can help generate a pro forma and tell you what that battery can do. We can help size it and really help you understand how that's going to work to the project and increase the economics and the benefit to the customer. And we can do that working directly with the customers, and we also typically are doing that with developers and EPCs. So reach out to us or come to Midwest Solar Expo in May, and love to talk to you and understand what your needs are, but also talk about batteries and how batteries can really help enhance the projects that are being developed right now across the Midwest.
Yeah, and if things go well, we will be having a tour of the APT facility led by Intelligent Generation. So if you're thinking about coming to the Midwest for a solar and storage conference, the Midwest Expo is a great place to be. There are 3 conferences this year in Chicago, Expo being the first. Then we have the Solar Farm Summit in July and RE Plus in November. So just go to cleanpowerhour.com, click on the events tab, and you'll see all of those events highlighted. You might be wondering, how do C&I solar PPAs get financed? For many, it remains a mystery. For others, there's Conductor. Conductor Solar helps hundreds of developers and EPCs find investors, close transactions, and collaborate effectively. With competitive bids from high-quality partners, Conductor makes sure you and your customers get the best PPA deal every time. Free to use for developers and EPCs? Visit conductor.solar today. I want to thank David Braun of Intelligent Generation for coming on the show. You guys are truly one of my all-time favorite companies here in the Midwest, and happy to answer any of my listeners' questions. I have extensive experience working with IG. I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Tim. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, listeners, this is Tim. I want to give a shout out to all of you. I do this for you twice a week. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us your time. I really appreciate you and what you're all about. You are part and parcel of the energy transition, whether you're an energy professional today or an aspiring energy professional. So thank you. I want to let you know that the Clean Power Hour has launched a listener survey, and it would mean so much to me if you would go to cleanpowerhour.com, click on the About Us link right there on the main navigation. That takes you to the About page, and you'll see a big graphic, Listener Survey. Just click on that graphic, and it takes just a couple of minutes. If you fill out the survey, I will send you a lovely baseball cap with our logo on it. The other thing I want our listeners to know is that this podcast is made possible by corporate sponsors. We have Chin Power Systems, the leading 3-phase string inverter manufacturer in North America. So check out CPS America. but we are very actively looking for additional support to make this show work. And you see here our media kit with all the sponsor benefits and statistics about the show. You know, we're dropping 2 episodes a week. We have now over 320,000 downloads on YouTube, and we're getting about 45,000 downloads per month. So this is a great way to bring your brand to our listeners, and our listeners are decision makers in clean energy. This includes project executives, engineers, finance, project management, and many other professionals who are making decisions about and developing, designing, installing, and making possible clean energy projects. So check out cleanpowerhour.com, both our listener survey on the About Us and our media kit, and become a sponsor today. Thank you so much. Let's grow solar and storage. The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 3-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes 3-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.